What's going on, everyone? Lauren Sisler here with AL.com. I got my SEC insider with me today, Matt Zenitz. We're going to talk a little Alabama football as we head into week 3 of the college football season, taking on South Carolina, and we'll start with the running game. Still very much a work in progress. I know that one of the big storylines kind of going into this past week, we saw 4 running backs that had 20-plus yards. So those explosive plays that this Alabama football team is looking for. 2 of those, though, not named Brian Robinson and or Najee Harris. What's going on with the running game, and where do we need to see some major improvements heading into SEC play, especially as we get into some of the bigger games like LSU?
Well, I'm actually going to use your words. So you said work in progress. That's very much what the running game is at this point. So the numbers are actually deceiving some from the other day. So, I mean, if you just look at the box score, you see 318 rushing yards as a team, which, I mean, that's very good.
Right.
But at the same time, the combination of those top 2 guys, Brian Robinson and Najee Harris, were responsible for all of 40% of those 318 yards, and going even beyond that in the first half. And this will help make it clear just why this is even more of a concern. They were facing a New Mexico State defense that was among the worst run defenses in the country last year. They were something like sixth worst nationally against the run last season, and the week before had given up 12.8 yards per carry to Washington State's top running back. But in the first half for Alabama against New Mexico State, those top 2 guys, Najee Harris and Brian Robinson, outside of one 19-yard run by Najee Harris, averaged a combined 3.6 yards per carry against that New Mexico State defense. Outside of that 19-yard run, it was 50 yards on 14 carries besides that one run. And obviously, Alabama's going to be looking for better production than that going into SEC play. One thing that was encouraging for them, though, was the fact that Kalen Robinson's a young guy that they like. Small, only 185, 190, but explosive. And his first carry against New Mexico State gets in late in the third quarter and breaks off a 74-yard touchdown run. And he's a guy who they feel like could potentially help them throughout the course of the year. And they were definitely encouraged to see that type of play from him once he did get in.
So obviously that'll be another underlying storyline as we go into this game against South Carolina. Now the offensive line, another area of maybe concern, a work in progress. We've seen Nick Saban shifting some guys around. It seems as though he kind of pointed to some of the injuries being the reason he's shifting them around. But what is your take, and really where does this offensive line need to sort of impress you before we do get into the bulk of SEC play?
Yes, I would say specifically the interior of the offensive line is a relative question mark right now. So you have a young guy in there, Evan Neal, a left guard, a true freshman. You have Chris Owens, who started game 1 at center and then was hurt this past game, and then Landon Dickerson, a transfer who's been in there at right guard and then started at center this past game in place of Chris Owens. But the interior of that line specifically is still somewhat of a question mark for them, and now goes against a South Carolina defense that is pretty solid on the defensive line, especially with one guy in particular, Javon Kinlaw, a defensive tackle, who's a 6'6", 310-pound guy, preseason all SEC selection. South Carolina people have heard from scouts that he's a potential first-round guy for next year's NFL draft, and was actually texting with Jim Nagy of the Senior Bowl, who views Javon Kinlaw as a potential high-end starter at the next level, at the NFL level. So he's going to be a guy who will very much give the interior of that offensive line for Alabama a real test this week.
Okay, our last topic of conversation here, the kicking game. We go back to the kicking game. Will Ryker, the freshman, week 1 against Duke, he had a 48-yarder, 49-yarder, doink, doink, off the uprights. And then this week, he had 2 of the same 48, 49, and through the uprights. So, cause for optimism? Are we feeling good about it?
Yeah, I think Alabama fans finally have some reason after all of this time to feel optimistic about the kicking situation. So I think it's been a decade now since an Alabama kicker has attempted more than 11 field goals for the year and made at least 80% of them. And I think that the coaching staff is feeling at least somewhat optimistic that Will Ryker could potentially be the guy that gives them the first 80+% make guy since I think it was Lee Tiffin 10 years ago. So like you said, missed the 48 and 49-yarder against Duke, comes back and coincidentally gets chances on 48 and 49-yarder against New Mexico State, makes both of them. And then to go along with that, which the coaching staff liked, has been very good on kickoffs and had 10 of them against New Mexico State. 9 of those produced touchbacks, so something else that the coaching staff was happy about with him.
Yeah, so right now, Will Ryker cruising at the altitude of 50% in the kicking game, right? 2 in, 2 out. We'll see how that translates this upcoming weekend. Great stuff from our SEC insider, Matt Zenitz. You can read all of his stuff. Catch him on AL.com. And for all your Alabama Crimson Tide updates, you can also go to AL.com.